The 2020 U.S. presidential election was like no other. COVID-19 upended everything, transforming daily life and the political landscape in unprecedented ways. The pandemic cast a long shadow over the election itself, influencing how campaigns were run and how people voted. The Democratic National Committee, tasked with getting their nominee, Joe Biden, elected, faced immense scrutiny and pressure from all sides. Critics accused them of trying to tip the scales in their favor, alleging manipulation and unfair practices. They pointed to changes in voting procedures, especially the surge in mail-in ballots, as evidence of potential fraud and manipulation. Supporters of the DNC countered that these changes were necessary to ensure voter safety during the pandemic. They argued that the pandemic demanded safe and accessible voting options, and that mail-in ballots were a crucial part of that strategy. This clash of perspectives fueled distrust and deepened the political divide in the country. Were the DNC's actions above board? Or were they part of a larger scheme to influence the election outcome? These questions lingered, casting a shadow over the entire election process and leaving many Americans feeling uneasy. These questions continue to haunt the American political landscape, raising concerns about the integrity of future elections. The 2020 election wasn't just about who won. It became a referendum on the very integrity of the American democratic process. The debates and controversies surrounding the election highlighted deep-seated issues within the political system. Adding fuel to the fire were the actions of prominent Democrats, whose words and actions were often scrutinized and misinterpreted. Their statements, often taken out of context, were used to bolster claims of wrongdoing and further inflame tensions. The DNC found themselves in a defensive posture, constantly trying to dispel rumors and accusations that seemed to grow by the day. This created an atmosphere of suspicion and paranoia that only deepened as the election drew closer, making it difficult for any side to trust the other. The DNC's handling of the 2020 election, regardless of intent, left many Americans questioning the legitimacy of the outcome and the future of their democracy. This has had a profound impact on American politics, eroding trust in institutions and deepening existing political divides that may take years to heal. The events of 2020 serve as a stark reminder of the fragility of democracy and the importance of safeguarding its integrity. As the nation moves forward, the lessons learned from this tumultuous period will be crucial in shaping the future of American politics. The DNC found itself not only battling external critics, but also facing internal dissent. Prominent figures within the Democratic Party voiced concerns about election integrity. Their statements, while often nuanced, were seized upon by critics as proof of a coordinated effort to rig the election. Tom Perez, then chair of the DNC, emphasized the need to protect voting rights. He advocated for expanding mail-in voting amidst the pandemic. However, his words were twisted by some to imply support for fraudulent activities.
She championed measures to make voting more accessible, yet her pronouncements were met with accusations of attempting to undermine election security.
Joe Biden, the Democratic nominee himself, repeatedly stressed the importance of a fair and free election. He urged his supporters to vote, emphasizing that every vote must be counted. But even his calls for a transparent process were met with skepticism by some. These internal disagreements within the Democratic Party, whether real or perceived, provided ammunition to those already suspicious of the DNC's motives. The public airing of these internal debates only served to further erode public trust in the electoral process. The COVID-19 pandemic forced a dramatic shift in how Americans voted. The traditional in-person voting system, which had been the cornerstone of American democracy for centuries, suddenly seemed fraught with risk. The fear of virus transmission in crowded polling stations led to a reevaluation of how to safely conduct elections. Mail-in voting, once a niche option, exploded in popularity. What was once a method used primarily by those unable to vote in person, such as military personnel and the elderly, became a widespread solution for millions of Americans. This surge was driven by health concerns and a desire to avoid crowded polling places. Long lines and the potential for close contact with others made traditional voting methods less appealing. While presented as a necessary adaptation, It quickly became a lightning rod for controversy. The rapid shift to mail-in voting sparked intense debates across the political spectrum. Proponents argued that mail-in voting was safe, secure, and essential for ensuring voter participation during a pandemic. They highlighted the rigorous processes in place to verify voter identities and ensure the integrity of the ballots. They pointed to its long history in American elections, particularly in states like Oregon, as proof of its reliability. Oregon, for example, has conducted all-mail elections for over 2 decades with minimal issues. They emphasized the need to balance public health with the fundamental right to vote, ensuring that every eligible voter could cast their ballot without risking their health was seen as a paramount concern. Opponents, however, viewed the rapid expansion of mail-in voting with suspicion. They argued that the sudden and widespread adoption of this method opened the door to potential abuses. They raised concerns about voter fraud, ballot harvesting, and the potential for manipulation. High-profile cases of alleged fraud were cited as evidence that mail-in voting could not be trusted. They questioned the ability of election officials to handle the influx of mail-in ballots, particularly in jurisdictions with limited experience with such a system. The capacity of the Postal Service to manage the increased volume of mail was also a significant concern. The debate over mail-in voting quickly became mired in partisan politics. Each side accused the other of attempting to manipulate the system to their advantage. What started as a public health measure morphed into another battleground in the fight for control of the American government. The issue of mail-in voting became a symbol of deeper political divides. The increased reliance on mail-in ballots, while understandable given the circumstances, inadvertently cast a shadow of doubt over the entire election. Questions about the legitimacy of the results lingered long after the votes were counted, highlighting the need for a more robust and transparent electoral process in the future. As the 2020 election approached, the legal landscape governing elections underwent a period of rapid change. This was a time of significant transformation, with new laws and regulations being introduced at a pace that left many voters and officials scrambling to keep up. Driven by the pandemic and fueled by partisan battles, states implemented a patchwork of new voting laws and procedures. The urgency of the situation led to a variety of approaches, each tailored to the unique challenges faced by different states. These changes, while intended to address emerging challenges, only served to further complicate an already contentious election. Voters found themselves navigating a maze of new rules, which varied widely from one state to another, adding to the overall confusion. Some states expanded access to voting, making it easier to register and cast a ballot. These states aimed to ensure that every eligible voter had the opportunity to participate in the democratic process, regardless of the obstacles posed by the pandemic. They implemented measures like automatic voter registration, no-excuse absentee voting, and streamlined the process to make it more accessible. This was seen as a way to modernize the voting system and make it more inclusive, and extended early voting periods. These measures were designed to reduce crowding at polling places and give voters more flexibility in casting their ballots. These changes were lauded by voting rights advocates who argued they removed barriers to participation and strengthened democracy. They believed that a more inclusive voting process would lead to a more representative government. Other states, however, moved in the opposite direction, enacting laws that critics argued were designed to suppress voter turnout, particularly among minority groups. These laws were seen as a step backward in the fight for equal voting rights. These laws included stricter voter ID requirements, reduced early voting periods, and other measures that made it more difficult for certain groups to vote. Critics argued that these laws disproportionately affected minority communities and low-income voters, and limitations on voter registration drives. These restrictions were seen as an attempt to limit the influence of grassroots organizations that work to increase voter participation. Supporters of these measures claimed they were necessary to prevent voter fraud and maintain election integrity. They argued that stricter laws were essential to ensure that every vote counted was legitimate and that the election results were trustworthy. These dueling approaches to election administration created a sense of confusion and uncertainty among voters. Many were unsure of the new rules and worried about whether their votes would be counted. The constantly shifting legal landscape, coupled with the partisan rhetoric surrounding these changes, further eroded public trust in the electoral process. Voters were left feeling disillusioned and skeptical about the fairness of the election. The 2020 election became less about choosing a president and more about navigating a complex and often contradictory web of voting laws and procedures. This environment of uncertainty and confusion highlighted the need for a more standardized and transparent electoral system. Voters sought information from various sources, including election officials and community meetings, to better understand the new rules. This effort to educate the public was crucial in ensuring that voters could navigate the complexities of the new system. Media coverage and expert analysis played a significant role in informing the public about the changes. Public debates and discussions helped to shed light on the implications of the new laws and the importance of voter participation. Despite the challenges, many voters remained hopeful and engaged, determined to exercise their right to vote. The resilience and determination of the electorate were a testament to the enduring strength of democracy. On Election Day, voters turned out in large numbers, navigating the new rules and procedures with the help of dedicated election officials. Their efforts ensured that the election could proceed smoothly, despite the unprecedented challenges. In the aftermath of the election, analysts and experts reflected on the process, examining voter turnout statistics and the effectiveness of the new laws. This reflection was essential in understanding the impact of the changes and planning for future elections. The future of election laws remains a topic of ongoing debate, with many hoping for reforms that will make the process more transparent, fair, and accessible for all. The lessons learned from the 2020 election will undoubtedly shape the future of American democracy.